Hello, everyone. Michael Martin here from Yahoo Esports, again with an I Got Next. But this week, we're going to try something a little different one more time before we return to our regularly scheduled discussion topics. Took a few questions from a little Q&A. Pulled these questions from Reddit, the Street Fighter Reddit to be specific. And I just wanted to interact with you guys and answer a couple questions about fighting games, fighting game community, and actually myself. So, let's jump right in. I think the username is itmasan. Not really sure. Sorry if I butchered your username. What is your personal favorite fighting game, and what are you looking forward to the most in 2017 in terms of FGC, upcoming fighting games, or additions to fighting games? Personal favorite fighting game. Street Fighter Zero 2, or Alpha 2 as it's known in the West, struck at the right time for me. I'm an old guy. Loved playing in the arcades. Used to work in an arcade. My buddies and I used to travel all over the region here in Seattle to compete in Street Fighter Zero 2, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, and I played a lot of Tekken 3 specifically. I remember one arcade in particular was in Seattle, downtown Seattle, in the International District. Hole-in-the-wall place called The Pit. Couldn't have been any bigger than the room I'm in right now. Had maybe 4 or 5 cabinets, but it was great. Fridays and Saturday nights, we'd be there till like 2 or 3 in the morning. Street Fighter Alpha 2, I love Sodom. I actually played a lot of Nash as well. Love the animation style. I would kill to have another Street Fighter in the similar 2D animation style as like the Alpha series. I also, though, should say that I played a lot of Tekken 3, so Tekken 3 is right up there with one of my favorite fighting games as well. Played a lot of Paul, Nina, Heihachi. Really miss those arcade days, and I haven't been involved in Tekken as much since then. So, in terms of what I'm looking forward to in 2017, improvements on Street Fighter V. As always, I want to see how that game evolves. Not just improvements, but the meta of the game, balance patches and whatnot. Capcom Pro Tour details are finally out, so I'm really looking forward to Capcom Pro Tour 2017. I'm really excited about the format for Red Bull Proving Grounds. I love that they're changing up the format a little bit, throwing in a little teams in the format, which my producer will be happy about. But also Tekken 7. I've been, you've probably seen me if you follow me on Twitter. You've probably seen I'm checking out other games, Killer Instinct and whatnot. Struggling in Street Fighter V, Rip Ryu, but I've always been better at Tekken than Street Fighter, like back in the day. So I haven't been involved in Tekken as much in recent years. Tekken 7. I'm really looking forward to it. I want to jump back into Tekken big time. So that might actually be the one thing I'm looking forward to the most. Next question comes from Chicken Little 11. Will younger, newer players dominate older players this year? Example, Punk, NuckleDu, Smug, John Takeuchi, Chris T, Julio Fuentes, Idom, the list goes on. Couple things I want to distinguish here. It's interesting to me that guys like NuckleDu is at the top of the Street Fighter food chain right now. Capcom Cup champion. Guys like NuckleDu, Phenom, another great European player. These guys are only in their 20s. Actually, they're only 20. I believe both turned 21 this year. And the funny thing is they're young. They're great. But they haven't, they've been playing fighting games for a few years now. They're not the youngest guys, or they're not the newest guys. So will those players continue to do well? Absolutely. All the veterans will. We saw it. Even the old guys. GamerB, Tokido, Daigo, all those guys, Bonchan, all those guys are doing really well. And I expect them to do well this year on CPT 2017. Of course, the guys like NuckleDu and Phenom will do well. One of the things that really stands out to me, though, is guys like Punk or John Takeuchi. These guys are 18-year-old guys, relatively new to the Street Fighter scene as far as, I guess, the competitive scene goes, and have made a big splash. And I think Street Fighter V, for whatever reason, made that easier for them to do. Guys like Chris T and Julio have had success in Street Fighter. Idom have had success in Street Fighter V. Smug, same thing. But didn't necessarily have the same success in Street Fighter 4. And I don't know if it's just I hate to say it, but maybe the game's easier. I don't know. What I do know is 8 or 9 years of competitive Street Fighter 4, you strip that away, and you've got these guys getting in on the ground floor of Street Fighter 5, and I think that contributes a lot to their success. So, will younger and newer players dominate the older players? I don't know if I'd necessarily say that. Younger and newer players will do well. Older players will also do well. But I do think the game and the scene is catering more towards some of these younger and newer players doing better than we've seen in the past. And you could probably say that about every Street Fighter game that's come out, every new game that's come out. Street Fighter 4 probably saw the same thing. Street Fighter 3, You had new people coming into the scene, more people interested in the game, and yeah, new people are just doing well. Here they are. So I don't think they'll dominate older players necessarily, but I think as a whole we'll see more younger players and newer players doing well in Street Fighter V. Finally, last question. Gregathol. I actually saw an interesting tweet from Arturo Sabin where he brought up the split there appears to be between East Coast and West Coast when it comes to pro players. The East definitely has a strong scene, there's no doubt, but the West Coast dominates in terms of big names. What are your thoughts on the alleged lack of big name sponsored East Coast players? Does the West just have a stronger esports foundation? Are East Coast players not trying hard enough to travel, be noticed, attract sponsors, or perhaps are too tightly focused on playing in their own area? Before I tackle these questions one by one, I do want to say I saw that tweet. I kind of mentioned it, like, hey, I'd love to talk about this more because I do believe there is a disparity when it comes to the attention these players are getting. In years past, I remember specifically maybe the last year or two with Street Fighter 4, I'm not an East Coast guy, so I don't want to speak for the scene, but I remember players kind of talking about how they're on the East Coast, their guys just weren't motivated enough or weren't traveling enough to get noticed. I don't know if that's laziness or what, or a lack of motivation. I don't know. What I do know is more players are more successful in Street Fighter V, so that drives their motivation to travel and get out there. Specifically, the East Coast, West Coast thing, I also want to mention that there are other great scenes in North America and the U.S. Texas, the South, we rarely talk about them. The Midwest, there's some great players. Guilty, great players in the Midwest. Chicago, Atlanta, we got to see Philadelphia. We got to see all of these scenes. Seattle, we got to see all of these scenes in Red Bull Proving Grounds last year, and we got to see even more this year. So we're going to see more great players who, maybe didn't have a chance to get noticed. Now, on to the questions. What are your thoughts on the alleged lack of big-name sponsored East Coast players? West Coast has more opportunities in general. It's not just a fighting game thing. I think it comes down to like jobs. It comes down to tech. Capcom's based in San Francisco, so NorCal's always been strong because Capcom has always tested their games and let those players sort of have first crack at Street Fighter. When it comes to the big name sponsored East Coast players, I think we're starting to get to a point where there are enough players, there are enough teams and organizations that there's only so much that can go around. We're still at a point where people with money might not be sure or hesitant about how they want to enter the fighting game community. Echo Fox came in, bought everyone up, but the people they did get, the players they got, were mostly established players. So yes, there's money to go around, but it sounds like they're hesitant on Street Fighter V and some players that we don't really know how they'll do. I think some of these players we'll see right away. I think some of these players will see evolve as far as how well they do on the Capcom Pro Tour, because if you remember last year, there was sort of cycles every couple months. Different players, different characters kind of rose to the top. One stands out to me, GamerBee and Momochi. Those guys were, quite frankly, not great at the beginning of the year, but they got great. And I think we'll see that, young and old players, going back to that question. But as far as East Coast players, there's more opportunities on the West Coast. Does the West have a stronger esports foundation? Maybe. There's a lot of organizations on the West Coast, but I just think there's more opportunities in general on the West Coast. And for East Coast players, results matter. I know a lot of people say that doesn't matter. Results matter. I mean, when a team Googles you and the first thing they see is, oh, so-and-so won tournaments X, Y, and Z, or is winning constantly at NLBC weeklies, that matters. Your own marketing and branding matters as well. This is sort of a new thing. Esports is young. Fighting games in esports is relatively young. And we're seeing now marketing and branding yourself, whether it's social media, streaming, being on streams at events. This is all important. These are the things that people pay attention to. K-Brad, I'm not saying he's not a great player, because he has shown he is. But that dude's personality is S++ tier, and that's why he's sponsored. That's why he has a team. Yes, he also plays great Street Fighter. That is another reason why he's on a team. But I mean, if that's not a great example of a guy who has personality and has made sort of his own brand, I don't know what is. So esports has a long ways to go. Fighting games has a long ways to go in esports, and I think big things out of 2017 as a whole. We'll see what happens with the East Coast players, but I think at some point they and other players in the South and Midwest and Canada, whatnot, will get their due. Thank you guys for your questions. Again, if you have any questions or comments, always feel free to drop them in the YouTube comment section or tweet at me at Bizarro_Mike, 1Z, 2Rs. I really appreciate you guys and the feedback you give for these series. Without you, we can't really do this, and it's great to see how this thing is evolving with the feedback you guys are giving us. Also, don't forget to check out Conversations and Fireballs, a casual conversation I have with an FGC personality or player every week. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.